What do? Like I said, I'm getting out of the business and everything, but this one is completely unrehearsed, coming right off of the old cuff. So I'm just gonna give it to you straight, straight business, if you will. And that's just that's just what it do. That's just what it do. So what I mean to say is, uh, hold on. I mean, a lot of people would say like I hate the Jedi's, and that's not true at all. Honestly, what it is that if I can't just join the IRA. It's like, I mean, I can't just support some uh, nation that formed once upon a time and dedicate myself to that. Like, I mean, like, the Americans. You could be from another nation. You could join the American army because you grew up in America and you came as a kid or whatever. And like that's 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 fine in my book. You might say it's contradictory, but like I don't think you can dedicate yourself to some other nation, and a lot of Americans wouldn't. So even French were a very powerful people once upon a time, and around that time, there was a guy like Dreyfus that they said, and they would love to go on and on about the Dreyfus affair. And I don't think it was fair. Like, big shout out to Dreyfus. I don't. I mean, not. I'm not talking no Richard Dreyfuss. No shout out to Richard Dreyfuss, but he believed he might have been descended from the people who brought down like the empire. Not that the Dreyfus is the one that I don't know if they are related at all, really, but he would say he was a little bit and serious. So I said no Richard Dreyfuss because he'd say, "Oh, we people once upon a time, I believe, well, from whatever legends my parents taught me, that he has some narrative from not even like Tsar Nicholas, like Tsar Alexander, like his grandfather or something. With the I don't know if it's the Black Hand or there was a lot of like people who were against uh, the church and especially the Bolsheviks. I mean, and the Tsarist Empire, aka the Caesars of that time. Kind of they had a big kind of inglorious bastards kind of feature in the basement. I don't know if Anastasia, like the cartoon, would have you believe made it out, but it was a tragic event nonetheless. But when it comes to represent another nation and having externalities, you have like, oh, this is a very smart person. This is a very noble person, and it's like I too am that nation. You might have been from a totally different nation and not have any genetic relation, but say, oh, this is my nation. And what is the nation like historically? There's no proof that there's any connection to them whatsoever. And that's even one step removed. There's no proof that those are the second temple, any connection to those the first temple, or anything about the first temple to even start. and they won't have you know that much about when the Bible's written because you can't tell me nothing. So it can't be from the intertestamental period because therefore it'd be a chance that came from them there. And you're gonna leave with Shamu over there. And so they would just have externalities that would benefit them, like, oh, this glorious fellow, Moses Mendelssohn. He was so witty and bold and sharp and like, oh, therefore you liked him. A lot of the in Netherlands, a lot of the Christians, the recently liberated from the Enlightenment and everything. Calvinists and reforms and all them, they would give a certain refuge to people around like the 17th century. They had a very big heyday. But I'm trying to dial it back even further. And but before I do so, it's like, oh, you have this favorable light. This guy's a real Einstein. But what about the fact that, there are certain things done by other people in the same group? Well, what happens is that they would often say, this is this abhorrent person does not represent us, and then, but then when there's an abhorrent act that does represent them, often it's misleading the facts regarding this, because they'll often, how do I say this? They'll often put it like, oh, this person, let's say, esteemed in the Bible or esteemed through different times. Let's say you have like Rashi. Oh, this is an esteemed person. So, like every commentary can be written in his script, a very revolutionary script. When the whole Mediterranean had a significant influence from revivalism, and they would just have a sort and function in Spain and everything of providing some sort of position, and one of the perfect ones is to say I'm an Israelitish person, because this is to a Christian in this new paradigm of kind of undercutting Christianity, to say that, oh, I can proof text and use isolated verses to kind of mislead people, and this is often coming from persons much in light of these revolutions I was talking about earlier, and Moses Mendelssohn as a protected person and other great persons that they can get the positive externality. Oh, this is a great nation, even though it's not necessarily the nation that anyone would have belonged to, especially when such a nation didn't exist, and the one nowadays doesn't represent um, necessarily the majority of those that would have some sort of stake in it, and whatever that would be anyway, because it's quite convoluted nowadays, or ever has it ever been. Uh, but nonetheless, with providing that, oh, I represent some sort of truth speaker, and I'm much involved, like Gutenberg lost his printing press kind of in the Faustian deal. So you can't say that publishing is a function of the church, even if it had once been. And uh, it's the purview of the publisher to control the narrative, and it has been at least for quite a bit of time, especially in the 20th century. But in the 21st, and I'm not saying all the 20th century, but the better half of the latter half of the 20th century has been very much, and this has come after the advent of penicillin, and other things where the population has it's expanded dramatically. And when it comes to the positive externalities, and those of negative consequence, often the ones that are negative get hit with the greatest deal of narrative, where certain facts are overlooked, and the bias is definitely seen. And this goes way back to Talmud, that like you have people that would just look at the Old Testament and just see how it represents some like ancient, person that represents them, and and definitely them at this time. This is before Ignatius of Loyola, before the crypto movement, Moses Mendelssohn, and everything. This was in the times where things were at their grimmest. This is when, fleeing the Mongols, and any of history that I talk about before this it is very much hit or miss, because most of history was destroyed by the Mongols in around like the 13th, 14th century. So I'm going to attempt to talk about something betwixt then and when I usually talk about, which is about 2,000 years ago. And so um, it's quite convoluted and cryptic, but at one time, like Christians could potentially like kind of Gnostics, if you get that, because I mean, like I can't look at the stories of the sinful woman in Mark and Luke, and then just like, oh, I'm like seriously thinking this is the same story as in John and Matthew, where these characters, come to life, and all the elucidation of the dynamics between the persons of Mary Magdalene and Mary Bethany and everything of that sort. So, you don't see enough people just wanting to show how there are unfavorable characters in the story, like, but they will want to show you the positive characteristics, and then that's why you have like the Jedi's. You have this kind of simple narrative where it's just like certain people have this force sensitivity, and other people, could potentially have a hijacked version, but the other version is essentially evil and not good. And like, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, seriously. I mean, it seems kind of simplistic, like in the children's narrative, it's just good versus evil, and that's how a lot of the Old Testament's written. It's just like, oh, like everybody outside is evil, evil dogs, and and so I mean, you'd almost think that like for a culture that doesn't have much water, maybe they'd have to convince people that they had a certain cleanliness ritual, especially with living in nomadic lifestyle with herds and then having to confine them at certain periods and stuff like that. They'd have like, oh, you can't cook this with that, and you have to destroy that. It's just like that protest is too much, and it's it's honestly like a matter of great consequence nowadays with dispensationalism and everything. And this is largely due to uh, Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis and has changed the view of this certain nation, and this is like um, you know what went from a negative perspective to a positive perspective. And there's certain great somber reverences, these kind of God-fearers, just talk about the fallen ones and mourn as though this takes away their sins, that um, a certain great host of people were innocently put to ashes, except for maybe a list of folks that you know a list of millions and millions of folks that went on to make this other nation. But I really wanted to talk about Mary Magdalene and the Waldensians. And so I'm starting here in Mark 16. It says the resurrection of Jesus Christ. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices, and they went to go and anoint him very early, and the sun had risen on the first day of the week. They came to the tomb. They were saying to one another, who will roll back this stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? When they looked up, they saw the stone had been rolled back, and it was very large. On entering into the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a white robe. They were utterly amazed. He said to them, do not be amazed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth. The crucified, he has been raised. He is not here. Behold the place where they have laid him. But go and tell his disciples and Peter, he is going before you to Galilee, and there you will see him as he told you. Then they sent out and fled the tomb, and seized with the trembling and bewilderment, and they said nothing to anyone, and they were afraid. Let me go back to verse 8 real quick. Mark 16, verse 8. Then they went out and fled from the tomb, seized with trembling and bewilderment. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. I mean, that should give one great pause, because it seemed to contradict what we know. In John, you have Mary Magdalene come out, like, and she become the apostles. Other times, John and John, like, you still have the beloved and Peter make it out there. But John would have the virtue of hearing would the great consensus would think about what was already quite popular. But nonetheless, in the Gospel of Mark, which we believe to be quite early compared to the rest, mostly because of some ambiguity. I mean, we see right here uh, you're told the abrupt termination. This is the notes. The abrupt termination causes some to believe that the original ending of the gospel may have been lost. I don't know if I'd agree with that. I'd almost wonder if the empty tomb was quite powerful in and of itself. It's suggestive of your role in announcing the resurrection has been fulfilled, or whether you believe it's something to come. And I mean, you can believe both. You can believe in kind of two resurrections. You can't deny that in Matthew, what was it? I can't remember. But I mean, towards the end of the chapter, I don't know if it's like 28 or something, maybe 29, maybe 27. But yeah, there's this point where um, the tombs are opened and the dead were raised, and um, it's quite undeniable. But and I've done videos of, I think one is muted that I did, but of how I think the time was more significant than everything because they had this certain forward lookingness. Oh, things aren't going great now, but one day we'll get our retribution. And thinking that the point of the retribution has passed is quite a defeater. And that's why I think a lot of beef into unity is like Jonathan Kahn, these people that are good, so good at talking to Christians, they are often talking about this prophecy yet not yet fulfilled. Hebrew Israelites love the prophecy not fulfilled because it speaks to a day where they get these earthly possessions, and often in a sexist sort of manner. And so in my Bible, I inherited it as a child. They have two endings to Mark. I don't know who would get the nerve to add to scripture, but they've been doing it from time immemorial. I mean, to say that what we have as Bible was just God took a role, and then to say that the Council of Nicene was a bunch of people taking these into their own hands is a little contradictory. I mean, the Nicene Creed, I'm going to come against a little bit, and I have before with my preterism, but this will be into the Waldensians. But I mean, I'm going to come out of it a little bit anyways. I'm going to do educational videos, and I'm going to go to the Nicene Creed, especially in a very reverent way. It's a very important creed. But when it comes to what's in the Bible, no, we can't really say for sure when it was written. And I mean, when you talk, like, let's say this idea that Genesis was written by Moses, you find it completely impossible to think that this was written once upon a time, like long time ago. Because you couldn't imagine like 1500 years later, like somebody would have the nerve or the audacity to, write with their own hands, as it says in the Quran, certain cursed people because they write with their own hands. And I'm not saying it's one race of people, there's a certain bloodline or certain people that just how they are. I mean, like as we see with Titus, there are people that can join the nation, people like Luke that can do the same thing. They can tell you this is like something that was written by God. I did this, I wrote this down, but God did it. Well, I mean, this is something that Greeks had pondered a long time, how to do that, and this is the biggest undercut in the world because Greeks had this belief that they were the sons of God. And so when Abraham becomes the father of all the Gentiles and he has a special seed in there, I mean, and then you might not even be a son of Abraham in the first place, then you have this idea that, Abraham's kind of like a god, that so you are our sons, we're trying to son each other. So then when it talks about God, every instance has to do with the location of the Israelites. And he's often called the men of war, and his host of angels is often described as like these armies. They would look and there'd be armies. They'd fight, there'd be a man. And like there's a lot of duality in God and all these different manifestations. But I mean, it doesn't have a very strong monotheistic tint to it in the modern sensibilities. But what I want to say really is this: that when it comes to Mary Magdalene, they were talking about like, oh, it was Dennis McDonald. He was on Myth Vision podcast, and he's talking about the sexism in Mark. Like, I think he was talking about the fact that, well, they were afraid and fearful women. Well, guess who makes women dress a certain way? Guess who makes women fearful? It's men. And you can be a sexist and still have a patronizing and judgmental view of people. And this is very common in the Bible. It's very, especially in the Old Testament. And so, I mean, when Talmud was written, it was like in the 8th century. And this is the time I want to talk about. This is before the Mongol invasion, so there's no history about it. But I'm going to talk about it anyways. And I think this is the origin of the Waldensians and the Cathars. And a lot of people want to expropriate the fact that the Inquisition, oh, what a show, what a show happened to us poor folk. But what really happened was with the Inquisition, after the Crusades, they were focused on people in their own nation. And again, missing an opportunity in the Crusades to get rid of the Moorish, Jewish, Islamic front, they would instead turn to the French, Eastern European, and German kind of Gnosticism. And this is quite unfortunate because I'm talking about Navarres and certain like kings of the. And these are people that funded Columbus and everything. Like you have Ferdinand and Isabella at the pinnacle of it all. The Castilians and this have you there. But what I want to say is that when it comes to history, history is run by the victor. History is written by the victors, and since Jerry Lewis, it's been certain people that are into the certain nationalism that's the complete antithesis of what they're trying to say with the opposition to the authorities in Europe at the time. It's like as being an other and being as a marginalized citizen or citizenized citizen, we don't get to benefit from the same things y'all get to benefit from. And when we separate church and state, we as Napoleon did, and they did in the 1930s in Germany, and different nations do of repatriating and what ends up happening is a lot of animosity and sorts of like that. And this had come at a certain time when the Mongols had pushed a lot of people west, so you didn't have um, only the people you used to have an immigrant invasion and stuff like that, and different viewpoints. And but I'm talking about a little bit before then. I'm talking about a time when um, the East was kept more at bay, and what you had was like a Christianity that wasn't really popular in the really powerful areas. Yeah, I mean, this is after like the Goths and the Vandals and um, like had their heyday. Like Spain and France and stuff were really powerful at this time, and the Habsburgs and Austria and things like that. And this is where you start to see the mention of Sephardic and Ashkenazi and things like that. You would never see this before the Mongol invasion. And in the Sassanid Empire, the Parthian Empire, this is where you would see like the Talmud get written, and this is where um, they would be most in opposition to Rome, and this is why Rome and Jesus are often conflated, and Esau and everything. And now there's like a favoring of certain people and the disfavoring of other people, and how everything points to this. And it comes from resentment, having lost a lot of land and things like this. And when there was like the time of the Maccabees, there was hope for Persia to control um, the the Levant, but from all this time since, it's just been Europe controlling it, and probably before that time too. But at that time, there was kind of a glimmer of hope, and you can see this in books like Malachi and Daniel and things like this. But the Inquisition started like with the Cathars and Waldensians, but it's been expropriated, just like they expropriate every other term to be about their own selves. It's kind of like this hyper focus on the ego and materialism and things like that, and being right and being smart and um, honesty and it's hard to see because they'll often take the role of, oh, I'm going to be the journalist. I'll tell you the truth. I'm just going to tell you how it is. But when it comes to it, it's just like, no, it's going to be told in a way that benefits them. And so this happened with all the publishers throughout all time. And you can't even read about the Shoah without taking a view that they want you to have a kind of dual covenant view. You'll have your own view, but they'll have their own Judaistic view of it about purpose and birth and resurrection and offering and things like that. And when it comes to women's rights, it's not something that was very big in the East. I mean, um, or great learning, um, because it's power kind of is God in and of itself. And I'm not saying the Gentiles were any better because obviously they did the same thing. But I'm here 2,000 years later with hindsight being 2020, telling you that there may have been people like kind of early roots of feminism in the Jesus movement, uh, and not necessarily later as Dennis McDonald would tell you, but in terms of um, Mark, when do you see Jesus mentioned? You see him mentioned, and or when you see Mary mentioned, you see that there's this woman that anoints him, and she casts out but she doesn't get named. I mean, she does get named, as we saw in verse 1, but I mean, anything can be added. Like when they talk about Genesis, the Nephilim, and things like that, they could be responding to Greek stories of, these half man, half god, namely the Greeks, as the Greeks saw it. But and the Titans in different degrees. I mean, I don't know if they had quarter and eighth and however they do that or whatever, but it's a lot to keep track of, and I much prefer, the monotheism and the kind of biblical view of it all. But the Cathars and the Waldensians were excommunicated and kept outside of it all, and especially in the Inquisition, and but I think there was a history, because when we talk about this shorter ending to Mark, it says here, found after verse 8 before the longer ending in 7th to 9th century manuscripts. So that's the 600s to the 900s. So a time period we know very little about. Um, that appears without the longer ending. Appears without the longer ending. So, I mean, it's almost like they would, when you hear this, it's almost like they would be trying to reconcile, if all the Gospels were written after Mark, as the theory goes, that they would be trying to reconcile the fact that it does contradict, because as we saw in verse 8, they went out and fled from the tomb, seized a trembling bewilderment, and these women told nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. But this longer ending supposedly came right after that, without the other ending or before it. And it's almost like they're trying to do harmony. And the shorter ending is not in your KJV, I don't believe. I don't believe it's in most of your Bibles. This is a Catholic Bible I got from a Catholic upbringing. But this shorter ending, I found something quite fascinating. And as it says in the shorter ending, longer ending, they're almost exclusive in a sense, that they both tell the story of these women doing what they hadn't done, and but what was the purpose? I mean, Mark is quite laconic, anyways, and Luke carries the same tradition I was talking about earlier, where people write things with their own hand and say it's God. Luke, being from whatever nation he was from, still does this. I mean, it's not confined to a certain race of people, but this is something you see done quite often. And Luke, I think, maybe Luke was based off of Marcion text, some people believed, but he's taking, like, expanding on certain verses in Mark, and adding these, elaborating. But there's a certain fundamental flaw in this, that if somebody wasn't there, it's like, what right do they have to speak on such matters? And just like Muslims, they'll have these lines of secession. Well, John told, Polycarp told, but honestly, it's dubious. And but that's fine by me. I mean, I think doubt is one of the few things that mercy can cover. Hopefully, otherwise, I'm in trouble. But it says, when he'd risen up on the first day, and this is in parentheses, he appeared to first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. And so it's like not only are they doing something they hadn't done before, they were afraid, and now they're going to talk. But now they're trying to tell you who somebody early in the story was. It's like, I mean, John does this too in his own way. But maybe it's because he knew. He talks about the adulterous woman in John 8, and then you start seeing Mary Magdalene. I think is how it goes, but don't quote me on that. But in Luke and Mark, you have it's sort of an ambiguous. You don't have much on Mary, and Lazarus is told in a parable, and I don't know if you have mentioned of Martha, and even if you do, you got to realize, because I think you do have the one story, but just like I was saying about Genesis 6 and other things, just because you have a verse here and there doesn't make it, oh, this is goes back to the earliest dating of such a book. I mean, you got to understand that people added things in the margins along the way to help explain it, and other people along the way thought it was part of the story and added it in. And we've done the best we can to put in italics or parentheses certain things, but it's still quite a difficult endeavor to try to figure out what the origin of certain verses. And when we talk about 300, 400 AD, you have basically no data at all, and very little when you talk about the 6th and 9th centuries, as we're talking about. In my honest opinion, you might have lots of people that say otherwise, but in my humble opinion. So when we go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel to every creature, whoever believes and is baptized. Wait, so I skipped a bunch. When they heard that she was alive and went been seen by her, they did not believe. Um, but I mean, honestly, a lot of what motivates it for me is that women are often the victims of violence, and not necessarily the perpetrators, and often even microaggressions and disrespect and certain things. And a lot of people justify it by saying they're the weaker sex, but honestly, and I think if you have the Holy Spirit, you would see that if somebody is weaker, you don't use your strength. You wouldn't hit a crippled person. Sorry, excuse me. You wouldn't hit somebody who's in the age under the age of majority, and things like this. You know what I mean? And so you can't use power, and it's quite distasteful to even use aggression, to raise one's voice and things like that. And we're all guilty, so I'm not going to try to point the finger. But what the Spirit convicts, I think, would be to be meek and mild, and to not abuse one's power. And I think this is good and virtuous. And a lot of people don't see this. These movie moguls, their own TV studios and things like this, like, oh, how far can my power get me, and things like that. And it's like, when it comes, I don't care if it's good. It's good to be the king. I mean, oh, it's consensual. I mean, it's just like you got to understand that with great power comes great responsibility, and that all these cult leaders, they abuse their power, and power corrupts. I know, but that's why I think the beauty of this movement, like Paul. I'm not sure that Paul was doing this. I'm not sure if that was the thing. He might have had his own thing of just seeming important, and being right, and things like this. But he wasn't necessarily into those kind of more taboo earthy things per se. And it's like, go into the whole. So keep on reading the writing. After she appeared to another form, to two of them walking. So it's like you'll see this. it's again reason to believe it's a later edition, because it's like he's referencing Luke. It's like after he appeared to another two of them, and John, whether it's the two on the road to Emmaus or the beloved and Peter and John, it's like he saw the two of them. So it's like they're trying to reconcile all this. They returned and told others, but they did not believe them either. So Mary Magdalene went weeping. They had heard that he was alive. I thought there was supposed to be a capital H. Seen by her, but they did not believe. And as it says in Luke, like some women testified, but this is what they said, and so it says, "Go into the whole world and proclaim the gospel to every creature. Whoever we say is who does not believe and be condemned, these sins will be accompany them. Who believe in my name, they will drive out the demons." And this is important in red ink, but this is things you'll read in other of the synoptics and things like that. Um, these signs will accompany these who believe in my name and will drive out demons, and they speak new languages. They will pick up serpents with their hands. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. Unless they're like tame and not venomous and things like that. And if they drink any deadly thing, they will not harm, and they will lay hands on the sick and they will recover. Don't do that. Lay hands on the sick, but don't expect them to recover, and don't drink deadly things. So then the Jesus after them spoke to them. He was taken up to heaven, took the seat at the right hand of God. But they went forth and preached everywhere, while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the word throughout the accompanying signs. And so that's the end of, I think, the KJV. But there's a different ending. So you go from they didn't tell anybody, the empty tomb, to something else. And what is that? Something marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. And it's this. It says, "And they reported all the instructions briefly to Peter's companions." As we read, it's from the first century. Sorry, the first millennium. This is a long time ago. And it says this. So it's not that the women. This is like probably added later, but quite a long time ago. Quite a long time ago. And we're talking about like, I don't know, 1,500 years ago or something. And so it's fascinating because that's not it. To this shorter ending, it says, afterwards, Jesus himself, comma, this, you'll never believe this. You'll never believe what it says here. This is amazing. Comma, through them. This blew my mind. Blew my cabeza. Through them. So could you imagine? It's these women who were afraid of the men, of what would happen, that ruled the city that they lived in. Had good reason to believe in the resurrection. Still hemmed their mouths, zipped it tight, threw away the key. But what happened? I am here to report what I'm reading here on this page. It says, and they reported all the instructions briefly to Peter's companions. Who? Well, you go back to verse 8. It's Mary. I don't care if her name's Mary, Mother of Jesus, Mary Salome, Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany. I mean, there's probably a few of them there. Who knows? I mean, whether it depends on which gospel you're reading. I don't believe there's a Mary Salome. Some people believe maybe Mary, the wife of Cleopas, was another one, but I don't know if she's known as Salome. I don't know. I'm not big on the names. I don't think that's the point. But it says, afterwards, Jesus himself, through them, he said he's going to send a comforter, another like him, to give him power from on high. This triumphant on earth in the church militant, this already but not yet, this living with the Spirit, with the testimony, fulfilling everything he's saying. And it's just like, it's just so eye-opening. It's like, it's not even about, like, I'm not talking about the longer ending where Jesus appeared, or the ending to the other gospels that we get this from, but in the earliest gospel, in a time way long ago, it says this. Afterwards, Jesus himself, because Paul talks about Christ in me. You know he does. Paul talks about Christ in me. He does. Afterwards, Jesus himself, through them, these women, Dr. Denison and talk about sexist mark, while using, I'm probably wrong about this, while using some of the other endings, probably the longer ending. I don't know. I don't even know why he would call Mark sexist. Because you got to understand, this was written a long time ago. And so things they did that might seem archaic to our time were quite revolutionary at that time for feminism. And it says that through them sent forth the East and West. Remember, this last video I was talking about the East and the West. That represents the Gentiles and how they spread them. Paul, he went first to his own people. Jesus went first to his own people, and he's listening. And so God fulfilled his end of the bargain by going to them first, and now he's free. And it's just like after you say, oh, God is like everything that I am and I'm doing and benefits me, you can't even invite the possibility that somebody could be cooking the same way as you but didn't hear from you or even learn from you and took it on, and you just would wholly be like, oh, because of your culture you were raised in, you have no part in us. And I don't think this is the role of the church. I think the church was just like, oh, just adopt our customs. This is how the Jesuits, and the Moranos and Cryptos got to quite elevated status. This status come from, like having a semblance of Christianity or dedicated Christianity. I don't know what kind of Christianity, certain like Roman Catholic Christianity, when they represented the government, where they're walking around with breastplates and swords and things like this. But I mean, it's a very foreign Christianity to the one I'm talking about, at least. So you might call me Catholic, but I don't know which Catholic you're referring to. But so it says here that they went and spread the gospel and all this. Isn't that amazing? These women going out there and a woman anointing Jesus, because as the Bible Project said, I mean, I can show you the video. They ended up doing it. They did the big one. They tied Jesus's resurrection, thus his enthronement, and the revealing of the quickening spirit of Jesus with his death. Because I mean, they're only 3 days apart, so how could you not? But his death, he started to reveal to them over time. And there's this woman that put this oil on his feet. I don't know if she had the premonition or not. But Jesus certainly did, that she was anointing him for burial. The anointing is very fundamental for choosing of the leader and things like this. And so when she put the oil on him, he said, this, I'm talking about Christ Jesus. I mean, I'm probably misconstruing his words, I know, but and when you read the story of Judas, like, it's at this time, and I think Mark, where he turns on Jesus. No, it's not Mark. I don't know. In one of the stories, it's not when he at this point when Judas turns on him. It's after he said he's going to die, I think. I don't know, but there's these little nuances, but that's the danger of taking like Mark and saying, I'm going to take like certain verses and just elucidate and just elaborate on all of that, because you're trying to say like you know when you don't know, and that's a problem. It's one I can live with. Like, the Bible's written, and I'm not here to say let's change the Bible. But I mean, it still carries on to this day. People think they have like supreme intelligence and they have divine connection and things like that, and they believe they have this way of interpreting that's just God given, and it's like, I mean, if it was God given, it would be lifting people up and not um, dividing. It would be uniting. It's just like, I mean, I almost like to be an oppressed person group, so don't get me wrong, but it's weird for certain groups like Americans that don't do this and don't do that, but want this and they want that. It's like they want the best of both worlds, and it's almost like the suffering of people in the Middle East is just doing that for them, giving them this ability to be oppressed while living in the lap of luxury at the same time. A walking contradiction, if you will. And it's very hard to accept the lies, because when it comes to bias, like, oh, this is just because God favored me and hated you. I mean, this is going to cause problems, and it continues to this day. And it's not like, oh, you keep on doing this and I have a problem. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you continue to lie, and I'll continue to tell the truth. It's just, I'm not on here because this is my opinion. It's this where I think I can do the most good, and the most good is to contradict the lies that are being told. And that has to do with history mostly. And the history is largely told in the Bible. And a lot of it is prophetic, such as the destruction of the temple. And when it comes to prophecy, I think it only happens after the fact. So when it comes to prophecy, talking about a third temple and things like this, I think impossible. I don't believe prophecy serves that purpose. And last but not least, I wanted to talk about, I think that's Genesis 1, where it says God created man both male and female. And I would say most likely that's a summarizing of an earlier verse, which is the opposite of what I was saying, which I think has a lot more merit. Instead of taking a verse of the Bible and writing tons on it, and you could say that's what I'm doing, but you got to also understand too that I have no authority. I have absolutely no authority. I'm just putting like a little seed out there, and if it and then when nobody looks, and if that seed grows, then so be it. But likely they're going to weed it out. And I don't own the land. This isn't worth a quibble about. I mean, I'm just some vagabond. And so when it comes to the Bible, I'm not speaking from the Spirit. I'm just trying to tell you about what I think the Bible's trying to communicate as I can read it. And it's kind of like the biggest book club of all time. And the most important book, nonetheless, which does tell a certain history, an important one. But it's very hard to see. It's very hard to see because it's written by very many authors, and the latter ones have an opposite goal as the former ones, but have to do it in a way of steel manning the argument and talking about it in the fulfillment of the other ones. And it's a very narrow road to walk. It's a very skinny tight rope line. And when it comes to, I think Americans, they're very, very much lazy about their reading homework, and there's certain leaders with the money and with the influence and with the Fernlaven, they just have a certain influence that's like quite uncanny. And when it comes to my final statement for this video, it's just simply that there was man and woman created, and that there was a hatred for Greeks, and in a lot of the Middle Eastern cultures, especially in days of poverty of yore, there wasn't much regard for their rights, and and yeah, I think, take care of the sisters. I mean, it's not like they're really exceptional people, really moral or anything, but they're just people, just like guys, they're not exceptionally moral or folk, they're just people, and there's not reason to come off the handle or anything like that, most of those things are quite regrettable. So, or all of those things. I mean, every one of those things when it comes to come to handle are always regrettable. So, it's just best to treat women with love and kindness and to give them rights and say so. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, but wasn't that amazing though? It was like through them, the apostle of the apostles, as they call Mary Magdalene in the Gospel of John. Here's um, they don't talk about it, and then it's just like, then they saw Jesus through them. I just find that so remarkable. I don't know. All right, peace.